Hello, YouTube family, and welcome to Journey Through the Bible, our new series here at Emmaus Road Productions. In this series, we take each chapter of the Bible and do a verse-by-verse exposition. At the end of each video, we will post discussion questions that you can think about on your own, engage in the comments section, or use these for small group discussions. In today's episode, we continue our journey through the Bible with Genesis chapter 5. I'm going to do this chapter a little different. Last time we saw the genealogy of Cain, but today we're going to see the genealogy of Seth. Today I will read chapter 5, but what you're going to see on screen is the chapter laid out on a timeline because, as we discussed last time, these genealogies get very repetitive, and for most folks, they don't put all the pieces together. So starting with Genesis chapter 5 and verse 1, and there are some hard names in here, so forgive me if my pronunciation is not spot on perfect, but I will try my best. This is the book of the generations of Adam. In the day that God created man, in the likeness of God made he him. Male and female created he them, and blessed them, and called their name Adam, in the day that they were created. And Adam lived 130 years, and begat a son in his own likeness, and after his image, and called his name Seth. And the days of Adam, after he had begotten Seth, were 800 years, and he begat sons and daughters. And all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. And Seth lived 105 years, and begat Enos. And Seth lived, after he begat Enos, 807 years, and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Seth were 912 years, and he died. And Enos lived 90 years, and begat Canaan. And Enos lived, after he begat Canaan, 815 years, and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Enos were 905 years, and he died. And Canaan lived 70 years, and begat Mahalalel. And Canaan lived, after he begat Mahalalel, 840 years, and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Canaan were 910 years, and he died. And Mahalalel lived 65 years, and begat Yared. And Mahalalel lived, after he begat Yared, 830 years, and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Mahalalel were 895 years, and he died. And Yared lived 162 years, and begat Enoch. And Yared lived, after he begat Enoch, 800 years, and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Yared were 962 years, and he died. And Enoch lived 65 years, and begat Methuselah. And Enoch walked with God, after he begat Methuselah, 300 years, and begat sons and daughters. All the days of Enoch were 365 years. And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. Methuselah lived 187 years, and begat Lamech. And Methuselah lived, after he begat Lamech, 782 years, and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Methuselah were 969 years, and he died. Lamech lived 182 years and begat a son. And he called his name Noah, saying, This same shall comfort us concerning our work and the toil of our hands, because of the ground which the Lord hath cursed. And Lamech lived after he begat Noah 595 years, and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Lamech were 777 years, and he died. And Noah was 500 years old, and Noah begat Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So that is the entire chapter. You see here a timeline. You can see there's a lot of years. This kid was born, that kid was born, this person died at this age. So we see a timeline of of 1,656 years, which also happens to be the year of the Great Flood, which we will be covering in the next 3 chapters after this study. But it's important. If something's in your Bible, it is important. You know, there's a tendency a lot of times when we get to these things, there's several places in Genesis. You go into the Gospels and the New Testament, there's some genealogies. You look at books that I struggle with, like over in First and Second Chronicles. It's just list of names, dates, a little tidbit. But you know, you get there's a lot in these, but you have to look for them. The tendency for a lot of folks, if you're going through read your Bible in a year thing, and you're just reading along, and you get to, you read like the first few, and it's like, and you look down, and everything so and so begat so and so, and lived so long and died. So you flip over. Also, in this study, I have said several times that I believe that the world is about 6,000 years old. And these genealogies are where I and other Bible scholars get the idea. Several people have estimated through using these genealogies the date of creation. So the official Israeli calendar, the one that they use today, let me talk here about calendars. The calendar we use today is called the Gregorian calendar. Before that, the world de facto used the Julian calendar in the Western world. The Israeli calendar, currently today, they have a different year than what we have. I would say today is October 7th, 2020. That's not the same day that it is on the Jewish calendar. In fact, the Jewish calendar it either just has or will very shortly be starting its new year. There are other cultures that use other calendars. So the Gregorian calendar basically classifies everything before the death of Christ as BC, and everything after as AD. I'm not even going to try to say that Latin word. So that's how predominantly in the Western world that we view time. So using these genealogies, if you get rid of that arbitrary, because in the Gregorian calendar, everything BC counts backwards. Like you start at, there is no year 0, but you start at 1 AD and you go 1, 2, 3, all the way up to today, which is 2020. BC, you go backwards. You start at 1 AD, which is also 1 BC, and you go back, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you get these dates that are backwards. The Israeli calendar, the Chinese calendar. There are several other cultures that use calendars besides the Gregorian calendar. But by not having this arbitrary division line in the middle of time where we count time backwards one way and forwards another way, and using genealogies in the Bible, people have calculated when they believe the year of creation was. So the official Israeli calendar says that it would have been 3760 BC. Bishop Ussher, he did a lot of analysis, and he concluded that, he tried to get down to the day that, the day of man was created. It was something like October 4th, 4004 BC. A guy I follow online, his name is Dr. Ken Johnson. He has done a lot of study with the Dead Sea Scrolls. And just so you know, the Dead Sea Scrolls are not just copies of the Bible, biblical books. There are other books and writings and stuff that are stored in those scrolls. It basically was, the Dead Sea Scrolls were a library for a sect of Jewish scholars called the Essenes. And they basically stored all these scrolls in these caves around the Dead Sea where it was low humidity with salt air, so that the scrolls wouldn't deteriorate, like paper books would, because they didn't have air conditioning back then. So, his calculations are 3,900. That creation was 3,925. If we continued counting time this way, if we didn't, do the BC and AD thing, the world, depending on which one of these estimates you use, would be somewhere between 5,780 to 6,024 years old. So that's kind of how this timeline looks. So let's get away from talking about calendars, and let's talk about some of the key points that we get in this genealogy of Genesis chapter 5. First, or as I say in chapter 4, these things are not riveting, so to speak. But what we see here is we're seeing one family line of Adam. You will notice that every person mentioned, basically the same patterns followed throughout all these verses. So-and-so lived, so-and-so begat, so-and-so, and then you see that all these people begat sons and daughters, and all the days of so-and-so's life were so many years. That's the structure of this entire chapter. We are working forward to Abraham, the father of the Jewish people. So these are not necessarily the firstborn or oldest son. For example, using my own genealogy, my grandfather kind of was really into genealogy and got me into it. And now since then, some of my siblings, my mother, they've really gotten into doing the Ancestry.com. If that's something you're into, maybe you're a little bit more excited about these genealogies than most people would be. But if I use my own genealogy, for example, I don't start backwards from me. I start from George the First, had George the Second, who had Marriott, his nickname was Boss, and then he had a son named Marriott, who was nicknamed Ott. And then even in my own genealogy, I find these little nuggets, like my great great grandfather, so three greats, he died gold mining in 1863 in Denver with his brother William. Him and my great 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 uncle went out to Denver seeking gold, and died. I joked with my wife that I wonder if they found gold and my great 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 uncle killed my great 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 grandfather because uh, he survived, but he left an infant son, and then his mother remarried and everything. So my great great grandfather, was basically an orphan, uh, orphaned at less than 1 years old because he was born in January of 1863. Then he had a son, Clarence, who had my grandfather, Fred, who had my dad, Fred. And then you get down to me. But I can do the same thing with other folks. I can go down and I can go George 1, George 2, and then I can take Marriott, uh, older brother, Jacob, and Jacob had a son named Henry, and Henry had a son named Matthias, and then nothing. Something happened to Matthias. Maybe he died before he had kids, uh, you know, but that line ends. But had he had children, there would be someone of the same generation as me that I probably wouldn't even know if I bumped into him in the street. So, uh, that's what we're seeing here in these genealogies. We're seeing the line because we're trying to get to Abraham, and then from Abraham, we're going to go into uh, Isaac and Jacob and the 12 tribes of Israel. That's where we're trying to get to. So the point I'm trying to make here is all these people that you see having kids, they didn't just have one kid. They had a bunch of kids. They had sons and daughters. Also, the chapter starts off talking about how God made Adam in his own image, meaning God's image, but Seth was made in the likeness of Adam. And what that speaks to is something we've already hit on, that once Adam and Eve fell and became this sinful state, Seth was made in the likeness of Adam. In other words, we all have a sinful, fallen nature because we're made in the likeness of Adam after he fell. Adam was made in the likeness of God. Seth was made in the likeness of Adam. Next, in this, we didn't see it with Cain's descendants, but we've learned here that before the Great Flood, the average human lifespan is 900 years. How in the world could this be? I mean, right here, we might as well just close the Bible, put it back on the shelf because this has got to be a fairy tale, right? Well, not necessarily. A bunch of people smarter than me have, come up with several different theories, but the truth is, we honestly don't know um, exactly what the world was like back then and how people could have lived so long. We're told that the earth as a whole was more temperate. Or these are some of the theories, that the earth was more temperate. There was maybe a higher percentage of oxygen. We were closer to the creation of Adam. So genetics were more pure because what controls your age is something called alleles on the end of each of your chromosomes. And, it's like, you know, basically Adam had kids. So it's like if you've ever done the thing where you make a copy of a copy of a copy on a Xerox machine or something like that, where, you know, uh, back in the day when I was in school, I remember sometimes, these teachers, because, funding and all that stuff wasn't there, they would make copies of things and then make copies of copies of copies. Or if you're really old like me, you remember the old mimeograph machines. And after a while, those copies get pretty bad looking. And now you're trying to take a quiz or answer a test, and you're looking at the teacher like, can I get something I could read? Um, so we don't know why, but we know that what the Bible is telling us is that they lived years. Um, there's been some skeptics who say, well, maybe they counted years differently. If you counted, if they said a year was a month, then Adam had Seth when he was 11 years old, and Seth had Enos when he was 7 years old. That doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense for us today, seeing that people are having children at hundreds of years old. So whatever was going on back in these days allowed people to live longer, more productive lives, and their lives, especially I believe the women also were able to have children much older than women are today. Another, um, you know, theory is, they use a different count. Even if you use a 360-day lunar year and you don't account for leap years and things like that, you're still going to be way up there. You're not going to get these years way down. Also, there are other cultures that in their old historical documents talk about people living much longer lives than what people do today. The Persian culture, the Sumerians, um, and like many people do with the Bible, they assume that this is translation error. There's something wrong here, because this is just so different from what we know today. It cannot possibly be true. I've talked a little bit about science, and sometimes I feel like maybe I talk on the science too much, like I'm trying to fight science. I'm not anti-science, but part of being of the scientific method is looking at things objectively. We should take the scripture at face value. Another criticism is, well, when it says Seth, it wasn't talking about Seth, it was talking about a group of people under Seth. That can't be the case, because the Bible is very explicit in saying that so and so had so and so, and they lived so many years after they had so and so, and they begat sons and daughters, and they lived so many years. It's clear. There's no other way that you can interpret the scripture here other than saying that these people lived for a really, really long time. When it says Methuselah, who is the oldest man in all of all time, as far as we know, in literature, in historical records, at 969 years, that means that man lived 969 years. If we lived like that today, I'm here in America, if I were able, if my grandfather was one of these guys, he would be telling me about, the times, before America was even founded, back when they, weren't sure there was anything here. Another interesting tidbit that we get is Enoch, the 7th generation from Adam, did not die. Now, don't confuse this Enoch, because there was an Enoch last time in chapter 4. Different Enochs here. Obviously, they all spoke the same language, so names and things would be very similar, because we see an Enoch and a Lamech, and we see Canaan, which is very close to Cain. Enoch, he didn't die. He basically, something happened in his life, And you can kind of tell it because I'll talk about the name meanings in a little bit, but uh, I believe that God showed Enoch what was to come of this world because he named his son Methuselah, which means his death shall bring. Um, so Enoch walked with God for 365 years, and then one day God said, "You know what? Don't bother going home. You're coming home with me to heaven." He's what the King James Version tells us later in the New Testament. He was translated. You can look it up in Hebrews chapter 11. He did not die. He walked along. Also, it's interesting to contrast that this man who did not die, who walked so closely with God, was the seventh generation from Adam, and Lamech, Cain's Lamech, not Methuselah's Lamech, Lamech on Cain's side, the one that the man that had all those famous inventors in his family. Uh, Remember him? He was the seventh generation from Adam. He had gone completely the opposite direction. He was so vile and evil that he was murdering people and writing songs to his wives about how great he was and how he was murdering folks. Lastly, it's easy for us to lose sight of what all these people living all these years could do to the population of the world. We're looking at 1,656 years. If we were to extrapolate that with today's growth rate of only 1.13, we would come up with 241 million people in this world that we're at. But that is a very low growth rate. You know, if you're in the Western world, if you're in America, you know it is very, very common for couples to get married, maybe not have any children at all. If they do have children, you know, I think in America, the last I heard, you know, we have on average 2.5 kids. So, you know, using today's growth rate is a really small measure. If we increase the growth rate just by 0.17% to 1.3%, we would have 3.9 billion people on the earth within 1,656 years. If the growth rate was just 1.5, we would have 122 billion people in the world. Now, we know they were killing each other, but we don't believe that disease and all the things that kill folks today, infant mortality rates were probably not as high as they were for us 100 years, 200 years ago. But just for some perspective on these growth rates, because I am not a mathematician, but the growth rate of the nation of Israel in Egypt in 400 years was about 2.57%. So think about that. You know, we'll see here as we get towards the end of Genesis and the beginning of Exodus, 70 people went into the land of Egypt. When they come out of Egypt led by Moses, conservatively, you have over 2 million people coming out of the land of Egypt. I've even heard some estimates that, you know, they went in as 70 people and they came out as a nation of 7 million. I've heard that. That's the high end of things. So all this to say, you know, don't think when we get to the flood that we're talking about a world where there's just a handful of people. In fact, it's hard not to get ahead of myself on this, so I'll probably reiterate these points next time. But when we get to the flood, uh, you know, we see that God destroys the entire earth in a global flood. If it was just, a small smattering of people in a local area, why didn't God just flood a small part of the world? Why did he have to flood the entire world? And the answer, obviously, is because there was anywhere from let's use the smaller numbers, you know, 3.9 billion. Today, our world's population is about 7 billion. You think about how big our population is. And if it was the 122 billion, no wonder God had to do such an extreme thing to get rid of everybody on earth. And we'll talk more about that when we get in the flood. I told you last time that names have meanings. In Hebrew, the words that we see, like you heard me one time while I was reading, and you may be thinking why I said Yared and not Jared. Because in Hebrew there is no J sound. The J's are pronounced like a Y. So the names, just like if I were translating something into another language and I'm speaking to someone and I'm talking about, say I'm speaking in Spanish and I say that, um, you know, you know, Thomas is going to the store. If I translate in Spanish, I'm still going to say that the guy's name's Thomas. I'm not going to, make his name Spanish and say Tomas. I'm not going to do that. So the names are basically in Hebrew. Hebrew is a language that has the letters have root words. So like the word alphabet, we get the word alphabet from the Hebrew letter Aleph, which basically the letter A has a root that means strong, leader. And then Beth, which is the second Hebrew letter, which means house. So Aleph, Beth is leader of the house. So that's how these names have meanings. When we put these together, we get something interesting. Now, I can't take credit for all this. I actually got this from a guy named Dr. Chuck Missler. He's no longer alive. He died a few years ago. You can actually look up. I rewatched one of the YouTube videos from him on this to make sure I got this right and everything. But so you have Adam equals man, Seth equals appointed, Enos equals mortal, Canaan equals sorrow, Mahalalel means the blessed of God, Yared equals shall come down, Enoch equals teaching, Methuselah, we already talked about, equals his death shall bring, Lamech equals despairing, and Noah is comfort or rest. So when you put all these together, you get a couple sentences, and the parentheses are words I added in here. Man is appointed mortal sorrow, but the blessed God shall come down teaching. His death shall bring the despairing comfort or rest. So what we have here in the names of all these people is we have God's ultimate plan. God, everything that we see happening is not an accident. God knew that before he created Adam, that Adam was going to fall and that he was going to have to send his son, Jesus, to die to bring us our final comfort or rest. None of this came as a shock. And, people who try to say that the Bible's just a book, you mean to tell me that Moses or a bunch of Jewish scribes sat down and contrived a way to give these people names that would succinctly lay out God's plan and basically the core tenets of Christendom? This is not an accident. The Bible is an amazing book. People have said that it's a book that was just written by men. This here shows, even Moses himself, I don't believe, when God was speaking to him, realized all this. He may have put it together because he was not on these name meanings, but if he went through and realized this, great. Or he may have not realized. He was just writing what God told him to. Adam, was this guy. Seth was this guy. Enos was this guy. Canaan was this guy. Mahalalel was this guy. But to say that the Bible is a made-up book, this is just one little nugget to show that the Bible is far more complex and there's a lot more in it, that this cannot be the work of men. Because if I were trying to write a story or a novel, it would be very, very difficult to get the cohesive story from Genesis to Revelation and have things like this buried within the pages where you can just keep looking deeper and deeper and deeper. So I hope I haven't totally bored you today. Don't have a ton of discussion questions for you. Everything I've said already, you can probably, especially if you're doing this in a small group setting, you can probably have tons of discussion on those topics. But, we're 5 chapters in, and we've seen some fantastical things. Things like the earth and the universe being created in 6 days. Talking serpents, cherubim guarding the tree of the knowledge of good, or the tree of life, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, people living nearly 1,000 years, a man not dying and going straight to heaven, in a world where it never rains, etc. Should all this be taken as literal history, or is this allegorical? In other words, is this all fact or fiction? I've made my case that I believe it's fact. But if you think it's fiction, why do you think it's fiction? And if it is fiction, but you're a believer, if you're a Christian, then why is this even in our Bibles? Secondly, if we can't scientifically explain all these strange things, does it mean that they're false? I can't scientifically, and there are smarter people than me that try to give theories and stuff, but the truth is, we will never know. We will never know why they lived 900 plus years. There's no way for us to know, because we're living in a different world, in a different time. This earth is different than the way it was, 6,000 years ago. So, because we can't explain it, doesn't mean that it's necessarily false. Just like I can't explain to you, when Jesus feeds the 5,000, how he takes, a couple little fish and barley loaves, and he breaks it, and not only does he feed 5,000, but he has 12 extra baskets of food left over, one for each of his disciples. I can explain it theologically that Jesus is God, and in doing that act, Jesus was showing himself to be the same as the Creator, and he was literally creating as he divided. But it doesn't make things, it doesn't make something false if I don't understand it. You know, I right now as I'm recording this, I know that high and low pressure, when I watch the weather, they got high and low pressure, but scientifically right now, I couldn't explain to you why you have high pressures, you have low pressures, you have hot high pressures, cold high pressures. I don't know. If you're a meteorologist, that's a simple answer for you. But for me, that's not a simple answer. So not knowing the full explanation for something scientifically does not mean what you think is wrong or false. Finally, if we assume the Bible is true, what do you think it would mean if people could live active lives for 900 years? You think about, especially nowadays, with all our wonderful technology and stuff, what if Sir Isaac Newton could still be alive? What if Galileo were still alive? What if Thomas Edison was still alive? What if Nikola Tesla was still alive? What if Steve Jobs was still alive and lived for hundreds and hundreds of years? The average lifespan today, at least here in America, is somewhere between 76, 78 years old. So, we spend the first, say, third of our life almost just learning things. Then we spend about a third, maybe a little more of our lives actually working, trying to make money so that one day, hopefully, we can retire, and then we spend our final years, enjoying the fruits of our labor, so to speak. We work really hard for a few years, but you think you're born. If you go to college, if you just get an undergraduate degree, you're spending at least 21, 22 years. In 22 years, typically, you're spending 22 years just to get educated. Then you got to do a bunch of little menial jobs till you find your thing. If you go for advanced degrees where you're getting masters or doctorates, or you're going into a field like medicine or law or something, most of the time, you're in your late 20s, early 30s before you even get out of school and can start putting into practice everything that you've learned. Imagine if you still had to spend that same amount of time learning stuff, but then you had 870 years to apply what you've learned. How awesome could that be? Thank you for watching. Please remember to like this video and subscribe. Hit the notification bell to be informed of new content. I said this last time, the way YouTube's working now, if you don't hit the notification bell, this video won't automatically show up in your feed for something to watch next. So do that if you would, please. If you're new here, you can check out my other videos. I've got a How to Study the Bible series up. So if you want to take a deeper dive and look at other chapters and do this at your own pace, because you can probably do it quicker than I can put out videos, feel free to do so. Thank you again, and have a wonderful day.